Dennis got a PhD from Stanford, and he just took 3 years to get it, which is super fast. After that, he spent a few years in the drug discovery industry before launching DrugHunter, which today counts more than 150 institutions as their clients and has more than $2 million in ARR. My name is Alexej, and I help SaaS founders scale. We drop an episode like this once a week. And in this episode, we'll talk about Dennis's journey, how he decided what kind of pricing to put on the product, what kind of features to prioritize, and the go-to-market. So enough of me rambling, let's dive into the episode. Hey Dennis, super excited to have you here.
Hey Alexej, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Awesome. So let's start with a quick introduction. Can you maybe tell us about your amazing academic career first, then industry stint, and now the business?
Sure, thank you. Well, my path in academia is relatively traditional for a chemist. I studied chemistry as an undergraduate, went to grad school. I did my MPhil in research at Cambridge in the UK before coming back and finishing my PhD at Stanford. At Stanford, realized there was so much exciting stuff going on in drug discovery, decided I had to be a part of industry. So after graduation, worked in the biotech industry, first at a small startup that went public called Rapid Therapeutics, and later at Genentech. And after that, left to found DrugHunter to serve drug discovery professionals.
Awesome. So when you launched DrugHunter, and maybe tell us a bit more about DrugHunter as well, but were there not other companies out there offering something similar to DrugHunter?
Yeah, so I'd say I have a pretty classic founder story where I didn't intend to start it as business. I actually started DrugHunter when I first started my career in the biotech industry as a way to help stay up to date on the science that was going on, because it was just so challenging to figure out from the literature or from the news what everybody's working on, why they're working on it, and why all this stuff is important. So I started a newsletter, had a website, and was doing a lot of this stuff for free, and actually thought about shutting it down while I was working because, work as a project leader in industry can be quite intense. There were so many things. I had 2 young kids. I told my wife, okay, I'm done. I'm going to go back to focusing on my work. And she actually said, no, you can't stop. My coworkers love it so much. They talk about it all the time. You should hear what they're saying about it. They say that this is really valuable. So that got the wheels turning a little bit, and eventually decided to launch it as a company to introduce a new commercial offering. And so now it's a B2B subscription service that provides scientific information for companies, but it actually started as a, sort of a newsletter for anybody working in the industry.
Interesting. And so right now, obviously there is this kind of research portal, right? But you also do provide, I guess, consulting services, right? Like what is the split between, real recurring revenue via almost like a self-serve platform versus maybe services you sell on the back of that?
Yeah, I think another classic founder situation is when we started, there were honestly a lot of different types of people interested in working with us, because it was so rare for an industry scientist to leave the industry and go do something different. So we had interest from people who wanted to market to pharmaceutical companies, for example, and they wanted help getting their scientific messaging right. So we did a little bit of marketing services at the beginning. There were investors who followed public companies, and they wanted our advice on, the science of these companies. Is this legitimate? Can you tell us about these issues? Those sorts of things. And finally, we had the subscription, which was actually quite a small amount in the beginning. But we went through a number of changes in the business model, and today the subscription is the lion's share of what we do. And I think focusing on that was a really key decision for the growth of the company.
And I guess it's so simple now to say focusing is key, right? But I know myself how hard it is to say no sometimes. Can you maybe walk us through the journey where, I guess initially it was so lucrative, I'm sure, for investors who have no clue about investment, like how to invest in certain companies, to tell them what they should invest in and, the background of like the science behind it, to suddenly say, no, we don't want to get these like,
Mhm.
hundreds of $1,000 projects, but want to actually build something, tech heavy with repeatable, recurring revenue. Like, talk us through the journey a bit more.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'm sure this has been said so many times in different areas, but it really is 10,000 little things to getting to the thing that initially works. Um, we had a lot of false starts because I think initially some of these consulting contracts and these marketing services, they were quite lucrative. People were paying a lot, but the problem there was you couldn't build a team on that sorts of revenue because it wasn't predictable. You'd get these big contracts one quarter, and then all of a sudden it would disappear for the next quarter. With consulting, we'd see a lot of interest in one period, and then a firm would disappear, and then you'd kind of be waiting for the next thing. And I realized probably too late that the most important thing for scaling a company is the quality of the people that you have on the team. And if you can't, guarantee a job for somebody, nobody good is gonna want to work for you, right? So I think that's where the subscription model really was key. And we messed up a lot of things there in the beginning too. That's probably another story. But yes, I think the thinking was, how do we sustain a team of top-notch people to serve this industry and go from there?
Got it. And then in terms of your marketing, right? So I guess initially, again, obviously, because your business model evolved, your, I guess, customer acquisition channels evolved as well. But initially, you had probably some sort of reputation through your academic and your industry track record, right? And you probably attended events and got leads that way, right? But then afterwards, did you figure out some sort of more repeatable, predictable revenue type of growth channel?
Yeah, so for us, we had the benefit, like I said, we started off as we had a free service, free newsletter, and free resources online. And so quite a number of people in the industry knew of us because of those things.
Okay.
And we continue to put out, I'd say, probably 20% of the things we do continue to be free resources, whether they're webinars or content, resources, reference materials, things like that. So we've had the benefit of not having had to do any kind of paid customer acquisition. It's still 100% organic, although we may supplement that with some more education about what the actual service is. Because I'd say the problem where we are now is everybody in the industry knows DrugHunter, but not everybody in the industry understands what DrugHunter's full access gives them, what the benefits are, how it helps companies, and so on. And so that's something we're going to be exploring. We have a new head of marketing joining next month, and her main goal is how do we educate this group of people who already know what DrugHunter or DrugHunter the company and DrugHunter the brand is. How do we introduce how this service can help them in their day-to-day work as well?
Got it. So when you say you grew organically, right, and your marketing was very organic, you did say that you raised, initially friends and family kind of like, round with the safe, and then recently you did another one. What was the first round for? Was it to build out the tech then?
Yeah, that's a great question. In hindsight, I probably didn't need to raise that first round because it was so small and, relatively we gave so much away that in hindsight, most of that money over the last 2 years, when I reflect on it, went to waste in terms of poor hiring decisions or things like that, typical founder mistakes. So I think people joke all the time that the first investors are funding your education, and they've been wonderful. I talk to all of them pretty much on a monthly basis almost. So I'd say the value of the first set of investors was more, many of them had been previous founders or entrepreneurs. I think they gave a lot of advice. And so more than the capital itself, it was really just that collective experience and growing together in this, so to speak. I think it's also true that, the first group of investors, they're backing you individually. And in hindsight, again, the first couple ideas were not what ultimately had traction. But I think thankfully with the patience and the iteration, we were able to get to where we are. So I'd say it mostly went to providing a buffer for all the mistakes that I made early on.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then the second round, then what is it for? Is it to push a bit more, maybe like other marketing channels, as you mentioned, beyond the
Yeah,
organic?
exactly. So now I think we have a much better sense of what we're doing. We have an incredibly strong team with 15 just top-notch people that couldn't be more proud to be associated with. And we have a sales function that runs itself. We have, product that operates, or a product department that, really is self-functioning. And so now it's about, scaling the marketing, right? How do we educate so everybody knows who DrugHunter is? How do we help educate the entire industry as to what we can, how we can save them time, save them money,
Mm-hmm,
help them do better in their discovery R&D efforts.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yes, it's investing in go-to-market.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that the first investors, did they come from your network, and are many of them also, industry professionals in the chemistry space, or how did you go about getting the very first investors?
Yeah, I think it's half and half. Half were, it's friends and family, so people that either I worked with in the past or, knew through my personal connections. Um, and I'd say in the second round, it's definitely leaned more towards people in the industry some of whom are customers or prospective customers. And
Mm-hmm.
when they heard that we were considering raising money, they had been interested in the first round and then this time joined because they'd seen the product themselves or the service themselves, and thought it had legs to keep growing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And throughout the whole, period and the history of the company, did you see potential competitors popping up, or were there other like more established players, but then you just provide a better service, better product? How tell us a bit more about the industry.
Yeah, I'd say there are definitely big providers of information services in pharma and in all industries, right? However, I think the biggest competitor is scientists doing things themselves. I think scientists really pride themselves on their knowledge and their ability to absorb information. I think the reality is today, the amount of information, the pace at which new information is coming out is no human being can stay on top of anything anymore. But it's a little bit of hard to get people to recognize this. And so people still try to gather information themselves. But I think increasingly people are realizing, well, it's so much more efficient to have this team of full-time people that's mainly former industry chemists dedicated to doing this for you. It's just economies of scale, right? Why bother trying to do this yourself when we have our own internal databases, we have our own tools for monitoring everything. We have a team that prepares everything in an easy to digest way. We do recordings, we do all these kinds of things. So um, I think that's becoming less of a competitor now. Where when we first started, they were like, "Oh well, I could probably do this myself on a weekend." Today, I don't think any individual could do what we do as a service in the same amount of time.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. No individual, and I'm sure you were asked that many times before with AI being
Of
so
course.
powerful now, right? How do you look at that? I'm sure you already use it as well for your own benefit as well, but don't you think that at some point, people might just try to, ask a bot some questions, and maybe the bot could have the same amount of detail you have, or would that not be possible?
Yeah, I think if the bot were trained on DrugHunter, and that's certainly something that people have an interest in, right? Like AI companies, they want to leverage our information to train their own models. Um, I'm not worried about AI. I love AI and machine learning. Any new technology or tools, I think it's just going to be like Excel, right? When Excel was introduced, it's like a novel concept, right? I think AI is the next Excel. Everybody's going to use it. People are going to use it in ways that they didn't fathom. It's going to increase efficiency across the board. But technology is not, never really creates a moat, right? And I don't worry about it because I think as long as we're focused on serving our customers, if what we do becomes obsolete or something like that because of technology, then whatever, we'll use it and we'll, add the next layer of value on top of that. We've tried to use AI tools to help with different aspects. And the problem that we've run into is it doesn't matter whether you use AI or a human being or something like that. The most expensive part of doing research is verifying the information. So if an AI gives you something, right, and gives you some citations, how do you know that those are the best references? You could ask another AI tool or you could cross-check it, but at the end of the day, it's the human stamp of approval that, okay, a credible industry scientist has looked at this and has verified that all of this information is valid and this is the best information. And then you establish that trust. That's sort of where the value comes from. Because you could have a team of outsourced scientists doing the same thing. But how do you know that the information that they're giving you is right? Right. So I think, value is establishing a pattern of, okay, DrugHunter, what they put out is consistently high quality, it's consistently accurate, and it's consistently the best. That's something, even if a competitor offered something that was 100% AI driven, would you trust it? And we've tried it a couple of times when AI has just gotten critical things glaringly wrong. If you have a 1% error rate or a 0.5% error rate, how low of that error rate does that AI need to have for you to replace a human being? That's an open question.
Yeah, makes sense. So in terms of product development, right, and features, how do you prioritize features? Do you kind of follow what your customers want and you do regular kind of like surveys, or how do you prioritize features?
Yeah, that is so hard. From the very beginning, that was so hard, and what got us into a lot of trouble from the very beginning. We get a ton of feedback, a ton of helpful suggestions for what to do next. And I think the single most valuable framework is focusing on the people who are already willing to pay, and focus on the people that are willing to pay the most for whatever that issue is. There's Superhuman, when I first got started, they had a good framework for product market fit, where you ask people to fill out a survey and you say, okay, how disappointed would you be to not have this anymore? And you wanted to focus on the people who were most disappointed if you shut down, because those are people who actually care. And basically the feedback from everybody else, you just ignore it. So I would layer that with, okay, look at the people who would be very disappointed and look at the people who are paying. And so of that subset, listen to them and just ignore everybody else. Because people who aren't paying, they don't care enough about it anyway. The people who aren't disappointed, you're already not really, satisfying their core need. So just focus on the people who already love what you've got, are already willing to pay for it, and just have them tell you what to do next.
Makes sense. So you mentioned problems or challenges. Yeah, can you tell us a bit about your challenges, maybe beyond just figuring out what feature to launch next? Any challenges you could share?
Yeah. I'm sure you hear all the time. There's just, so many. It's 10,000 little things. But the big ones, I'd say, fall into two categories. One, well, probably the biggest category is not drawing boundaries. So I'd say in that end, I'm the type of person, I'm a scientist, right, by training. I got into science because I want to create things that are useful for society. And because of that, I give way too much away for free. And that's hurtful for the company, right? So I think in the very beginning, I tended to price things way too low. And it was, you just couldn't grow the business because you couldn't fund additional hires to keep improving the product and all that, because, I just was afraid to ask for a price that was appropriate for the service. I had a really good call with an influential CEO who told me, you need to charge what you can, because if you're creating value, you deserve to grow. And that's something that stuck with me. Like, he's right. We're creating something of value. We deserve to grow. We need to charge more for this. It's going to be good for the industry if we charge more for this, because it's going to allow us to make a better and better service. Whereas if the company is starving, we can't create the best service or product for anybody. And so that's kind of one category. So hiring, frankly, a head of sales who is infinitely better at me than setting boundaries and just saying, look, no, we can't give you this discount because that's not fair to everybody else. This is what we need to support a team of 15 full-time employees and continue hiring. And frankly, be able to walk away. For me, it was just so painful to have a customer who, wanted to purchase, wanted to use it, but, didn't think the price was right. I used to just be like, okay, we'll give you a discount. Fortunately, those keys have been taken away from me.
Cool. Yeah. So, but talking about pricing, right? And that's probably one of the areas which in the SaaS world has been covered the least, right? Even though it's so critical and it can make such a big difference to your profit margin and, your revenue, of course. Yeah. How did you go about pricing? Yeah. As you say, initially you probably underpriced it. But then how did you deal with price increases? Did you leave the same prices for the older customers and maybe you had some sort of grandfathering period? Or do you still have customers maybe on like a really low price and then every new customer comes in on a new price and you keep increasing the prices constantly? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I'd say that is an area that if I could go back and do over, I would absolutely do over. And I'm sure many, many people have the same feeling. So Jason Cohen, he writes a blog called A Smart Bear. He's the founder of, or I think he's one of the founders, or at least he's the CTO of WP Engine. He before that had exited another company. He just has so much brilliant advice. Highly recommend his book. He has an article on pricing, and his take is basically the way you price your service or product dictates what kind of company you become. And it's really not something that you can, get wrong. And it's in order of magnitudes, right? If you charge $1 a month versus $10 a month versus $100 a month versus $1,000 a month, that tells you what kind of company you're going to be. And we sort of made the mistake of being in this no man's land where we started at like $100 a month per person. And that's just like right in the middle of too expensive to really go consumer, not expensive enough to actually be B2B. And so we had to do this painful correction where over time, we had to just do a complete reset. Like all of the existing customers, I think we had 70% logo churn or something like that when we had to increase the price 10x, frankly. And we lost 70% of the customers in that first round. But honestly, the company just wasn't going to be able to grow if we didn't do that. Now, fortunately, I think we were creating so much value that it was clear, at least to a subset of people, that yes, this is absolutely worth, even at 10x the price, we're saving them, 100x, right? So, and since then, price increases have moderated, and but that was a really critical step for the company.
Makes sense. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I actually watched. I think you posted this video of him at MicroConf talking. In fact, that's the MicroConf I'm going to in Atlanta. So yeah, he was basically talking about if he would to start a new business, right? Like what areas to go into and how to price, right? To basically keep increasing the price until basically people churn, right? Like basically, right? That what it is. Yeah, interesting. And so in terms of your market, I guess obviously the biggest pharma companies are in the US, maybe followed by, I don't know, like Switzerland, the UK, etc. Like what's your geographical split?
Yeah, I'd say it's primarily, it's like, I've actually been surprised. It's 50-50 US and ex-US. Because we're based in the US, what I've been surprised to see was actually people outside the US valued our service even more because they have to travel to conferences to the US to see what's going on, and they have a harder time following following what people in the industry are working on. That said, I do foresee the US being our biggest base for the foreseeable future. It is where most of the innovation is happening.
Got it. And in terms of, let's say, an exit event, right? I mean, I guess, having done banking in natural resources and utilities and clean tech mining, for each vertical, we used to have a separate research platform to get, the industry news, the pricing, the players, etc. And one of the biggest data providers in oil and gas, called Wood Mackenzie, was actually acquired by a large private equity fund. I think Hellman and Friedman. They then exited to another private equity fund. So I think that's basically what you intend at some point probably to do, right? To sell it to some sort of, either growth equity fund who can maybe fund your growth to get much, much bigger, right? And maybe do some sort of like strategic bolt-ons, or completely maybe exit to like a PE, right? Or are there any big strategics in your space who could also acquire you down the line?
Yeah, so to that end, I'd say it's still quite a long ways down the road that I haven't spent whole lot of time thinking about that sort of thing. I really view myself as a steward of the service. Actually, when we started it, I thought about starting it as a nonprofit. And because as a scientist, I wanted to make something that was just useful for people, but realized that there are a lot of structural problems with nonprofits. I think you can't actually build a truly useful service with a nonprofit model. You need profit to fund growth, period. That's just, that's the end of it. That said, my view on it is I want to make this as useful as possible for as many people as possible. And someday, hopefully a long time from now, we'll run into a situation where there are just no new areas to grow, and we don't necessarily need that stewardship anymore. At that point in time, I'm sure there'll be a good way to set it up for long-term governance. And I think there are many, obviously with a company that's creating a lot of value, there are many opportunities or options for how you set it up for long-term viability.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Amazing. Let's jump into the quick fire questions.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
So the first one is, what's a book you love and could recommend to other SaaS founders?
There's so many. I wish I had more time to read more books before I got started. Say customer-centric selling is one, because I'm a scientist. I have no commercial background, no experience in sales whatsoever. But that's an example of a book that introduced to me sales process. You can build a pipeline, you can build steps, and you can build a sales process that guides your customers through the customer journey in a very systematic way. And that was something novel to me as a scientist. I thought sales was just, people building relationships and all this stuff, which it is to a certain extent, but it's also got structure, and you can, engineer and design a process. And it's so important to do that right at the beginning. And that's something I didn't appreciate. So if you're a technical founder like myself, have a PhD or just a degree in engineering, but not sales background, that was a really eye-opening book.
Cool. I mean, to be honest, when you actually run a business and you read books, in particular on a certain topic where you have maybe a certain problem you want to solve, you just absorb the book so much better than reading everything in advance, right? So you have time, you have time.
Totally. It's true. Yeah.
All right. Who is a business leader you admire the most?
Admire the most. It's funny that this is going to be controversial now, but I think Elon Musk was somebody that I always admired, as a former scientist, right? I mean, how many people start PhD programs in physics and then go on to, build really revolutionary companies? I mean, Tesla, SpaceX, these are kinds of problems that, they're just so hard. But he's managed to make it scalable. And so when I grew up, I wanted to be an astronaut, right? I loved watching the rocket launches, NASA and Florida and Houston and those sorts of things. Never dreamed that you could have a commercial company putting satellites in space, which, is fantastic. It's just amazing to see somebody with a technical background just be absolutely laser focused and successful in building scalable, commercially viable solutions for the whole planet. Still inspirational, although in more recent years has become a little bit more controversial.
Yeah. And of course, OpenAI has been a nonprofit, right? And now being a profit actually has to deal with so many, legal challenges, right? And the lawsuit as well. So, but another parallel there as well. Awesome. What's a SaaS tool you use that you think nobody else uses, or
SaaS
few people know of?
That's a great question. It's funny because in my industry, when you work in pharma, there are just so many restrictions on the kinds of tools that you use that a lot of the very basic things that we use, like Zapier, that every company uses, would be foreign to people working in biotech or pharma. But something that nobody else uses, that's tough because I feel like I steal ideas from all the other SaaS people and I just import them to healthcare. I'd have to think about this one a little
Yeah.
bit
No,
more.
don't worry. I think, yeah. Yeah. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Best piece of advice. That's a tricky one because I think there's two categories there. I think there's advice that in hindsight was incredibly valuable had I known and understood why and to take it. Versus advice that I got and actually acted on that created value. So I'd say in hindsight, one of the best pieces of advice was to hire a sales team. So when I was first starting, I thought this was a service that only I could sell or only a PhD could sell. And what I learned through hiring some truly amazing people is that an excellent salesperson simply understands sales process, they understand relationships, they understand how and why people buy. And if you give them materials, demo videos, access to scientists for questions, things like that, they can execute or lead the sales process on their own. And that single-handedly, I'd say, is the key unlock that helped us grow from a smaller company where I was on every single sales call to today where the sales team is able to take orders and guide customers through the journey almost completely without me.
That's cool. I mean, on that note then, right, like what is your majority of your time spent on right now as a founder?
It's a good question. I think so. Right now, today, we've recently hired a number of good people, and I'm just focused on onboarding. So transferring all that knowledge in all these different departments and just making sure that all of them are set up for success. So that's where my mind's at today. It'll probably, it changes on a daily, if not weekly basis, as I'm sure you know. That's where I'm right now.
Makes sense. Okay, cool. And then finally, who is a SaaS founder, ideally, who you would like to see on this podcast?
SaaS founder on this podcast. I don't know if he would necessarily consider himself a SaaS founder, but we already mentioned Jason Cohen. I think he's fantastic. He's in Hampton, actually, and I read basically everything on his blog. He just has so many insightful nuggets and seems very down to earth. So I'd love to hear more from him.
Amazing. I'll reach out to him. I think that will be our biggest speaker yet. And we had the founder of Tiny Seat the other day, but I'll reach out to Jason because I'm a big fan of his content as well. And obviously he, built like amazing businesses, and WP Engine is still, going and huge as well. Amazing. Look, it was super insightful. So thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, it's really nice to think through some of this stuff.
To finish off this episode, a little promotion from our end. Neoptima is an award-winning marketing agency for B2B SaaS businesses. We work with companies backed by YC, Sequoia, Carlyle, Lightspeed Ventures, Northzone, and many other top VCs and PE investors. We work with venture-backed, private equity-owned, and bootstrapped SaaS businesses all around the world. Reach out to us and book a call in the description below so we can optimize your growth journey. If you have a fellow founder, if you have a team member, if you are part of a Slack group, Telegram, or WhatsApp group with other founders that could get value from this episode, please share this episode with them. We want to help as many founders as possible to scale their business. Thank you for joining us on this journey. See you in the next episode.